Hey friends, let's take today to do some reviewing. Let's pause and make sure that we are really soaking in everything we've learned about poetry. So I know this week we spent some time learning one example of figurative language called alliteration. And that is where a poet has more than one word in a line with the same beginning sound, right? And my clue to think of what is alliteration is tongue twisters. And you all know how fun tongue twisters are to try and read, so you can easily figure out why a poet would want to include that, right? It definitely engages the reader in kind of a silly way. So we know poets use figurative language. We also know that poets use repetition. And some poets also use rhyme. Now, as we add to the things we know about poetry, sometimes it's hard to organize finding all of these things in a poem. So, one thing I like to do is kind of analyze a copy of a poem by looking at, okay, what are the stanzas? What are the lines? Do I see any figurative language in this? Where might the rhymes be? So, sometimes poets and poetry readers can go through and look for those different poetry elements by numbering the lines, right? Okay, and then I know that in my first stanza, there are 8 lines in this poem that we read. And in my second stanza, we add another 8. So the total number of lines in this poem is 16. Then I can go through and look for alliteration. That was first on our list, right? So I have things like Sneaky Sam, Nasty Nell, Ted the Toad, Grumpy Gale, Monster Mo. This should sound familiar because this is exactly what we worked on earlier in the week. This is the poem we practiced our alliteration with. But today I want to show you how I would go through and look for some rhyming words. And we use letters to note any kind of patterns that we might see. So I'd start with the letter A, and anytime I find a word that rhymes with an, that's also going to get a letter A. I does not rhyme with and, so I go to my next letter, B. Now Sam does not rhyme with I or an, so it gets the letter C. Look here though, I pie. So we get another B. Rat doesn't rhyme with I, Ann, or Sam. New letter. Toes doesn't rhyme with anything yet. New letter. Nell doesn't rhyme with anything yet. Next letter. But look, toes, nose. So I get another letter E. Now I've got the word toad. It's, a near rhyme to toes, but it's not perfect. So it gets its own letter. G comes next in the alphabet. Knee. Is there anything that rhymes with knee? Ann, I, Sam, rat, toes, Nell. Letter H. Gale. New word. Knee, me. Mo almost rhymes with toes and nose, but it doesn't have a s on the end, so it also gets a new letter. J is next in the alphabet. Rough doesn't rhyme with anything yet. Now doesn't rhyme with anything yet. But enough and rough rhyme, so we get another K. So the reason I would go through and do that is because you'll notice I've got rhyming words at the end of lines 2 and 4, rhyming words at the ends of lines 6 and 8, rhyming words at the end of lines 10 and 12, and more rhyming words at the ends of line 14 and 16. So I can see that one pattern that Jack Prelutsky decided to use in this poem is that he would use rhymes for every other line. So now that I've looked for alliteration and rhymes, let's pause for just a second and see if we can find repetition. I see as I go down the lines, the word my repeats. And again, it's every other. Then I also see best repeats and friend repeats. So what I'm noticing is that as Jack implements some of those elements of poetry that we're familiar with, rhyming, repetition, alliteration, I'm seeing he does a pattern of it going every other line. I see that pattern with our repetition. I see that pattern with our poem. And even down here, I see that pattern with our alliteration. All of these decisions are intentional decisions with a poet to make sure that they have the right rhythm as you are reading it. So I'm going to give you some practice time to look for these same elements in other poems.